Hello and welcome to our second episode of the Symphonic podcast. With me, as always, is Andrew Owen, and I am Bernardo Miethe. And today we're going to be talking about Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, Suite No.2. But first, we're going to talk about Impressionism and also the life of Ravel. So first, let's talk about the word Impressionism. Andrew.
Well, the word Impressionism is... We understand the word Impressionism to come from the title of a painting by Monet, called Impression, Sunrise, which Monet painted in 1873. And the way that the painting works is it just suggests what it's depicting. It's not just pure representational art. Each brush stroke sort of gets around, gets at something rather than actually depicting it. And so this kind of distance that this creates is just a kind of stylization that the composers of the era, really shortly after 1873, composers like Ravel and Debussy, are working towards having this kind of, I don't know, suggesting rather than simply representing.
Mm-hmm. So the term was first used to describe music in 1887, and it was used by the secretary of the Académie the Beaux-Arts, and it was used in 1887, as I said, to attack Debussy's Printemps. How do you say that?
Printemps.
Printemps. I like that better.
Don't you love French?
Yes. And some of the Debussy didn't like the word Impressionism when it came to his music, but we'll see that Ravel actually embraced it more. Like in painting, we see all these like brush strokes and stuff like that, and I guess that they were trying to get away from more classical form, I guess, and they're trying to just establish more of a mood. More of the colors are really important in this kind of paintings and also music. So obviously we have a lot of landscapes and a lot of water and light imagery. And it's the same in music as well. We have a lot of representation of water and stuff like that. I mean, we'll see the beginning of Daphnis and Chloe, of the second suite, is this very melodic, almost like a water-like motif. And is there anything else you want to say about music?
I mean, it's... Yeah, really, what I think really characterizes impressionistic music is how it depicts a mood rather than depicting an event. Typically, it's an instant that's depicted. I mean, it feels like even though this is a piece of music that takes place over time, what it's depicting is something that is instantaneous. It's this kind of timelessness that happens. I think Ravel and Debussy are both very good at making stasis not feel boring.
Of course, yeah.
That's I think what really makes Impressionism.
Mm-hmm. Also, obviously, some of the technical features that this music uses is new chord combinations that were maybe used, but they have been expanded now. Ambiguous tonality, chords of the 9th, 11th, and 13th being used instead of triadic chords of the 7th. Also, appoggiaturas are now part of regular chords, and a lot of parallel movement, and we're going to see that in Daphnis and Chloe. There's a lot of, we have all these gigantic chords that move exactly at the same time, and obviously exotic scales, whole tone scales, pentatonic scales, modes, and of course a lot of chromaticism.
And so for non-musicians, what this means is that there are in classical music and the works of Mozart, we tend to expect just three notes, the three notes of a chord, to be what are always happening. Just always those three elements. What these impressionistic composers do is use notes on top of those three notes, the 7, the 9, the 11, and the 13. You just go up more and more intervals of 2, so you get these big jazzy chords. Jazz uses these extended chords all the time. And parallel movement, as Bernardo explains, is this just everything moving in the same direction rather than moving in contrast to each other.
Mm-hmm. And so this chords were used before, but they were usually used dissonantly. You know, these chords were dissonant before the Impressionists, but now, as Dukas put it, this attention to distant overtones, particularly generated by gong-like lower notes, produces a new sense of musical space, in effect giving a greater sense of the physical reality of sound. There is a wide dynamic and registral range.
The music has wide dynamics and registral, and has a wide registral range, so you have this great sense of physical reality of sound. Something like that.
That's great. We'll put that one.
Just say it out loud.
It's good. It's better when you whisper.
It's better when
It's like, hey, I'm really close to you. All right, so let's talk about the stylistic innovations of impressionistic music. So, like we said before, they are rejecting the usual forms that we were used to before. You know, in the Romantic period, in the Classical period, forms are really important. But now they're rejecting those forms, and they said that it was to promote intellectual reflection, and of course. Impressionists favored delicate sensuality and immediacy, and the idea of the arts as an invitation to pleasure. I mean, you just said you know, it's what's happening in the moment, which is really important.
If you have a form, then you're suggesting that you're going somewhere. Impressionistic music shouldn't go anywhere. It's supposed to stay put. I mean, Ravel, in his most famous piece, Bolero, doesn't use any form other than simply repeating the melody over and over again in a really long orchestral crescendo.
Yeah.
There's no form, it's just a repetition.
Yeah.
Just something that it suggests that things aren't changing, we're just thinking about it more.
Even if it doesn't have a form, it's still very evocative. And I mean, especially we're going to see that in Daphnis and Chloe. It's like, you know, the use of pentatonic scales and modes makes it really, you know, I guess exotic and sensual.
Sure.
I mean, I guess we've seen that before in other works. Obviously, I don't know if you've heard Korsakov's Scheherazade. You know, it's also very sensual as well, and it's because of the use of modes and this, I guess, kind of Oriental-like themes. I mean, they were trying to maybe imitate some of these Oriental.
We're just trying to innovate. I mean, just
yeah,
trying to not sound like Romantic music, trying to create a new sound, which you can do with these scales. The pentatonic scale are those 5 pitches that all folk tunes generally use. A whole tone scale is something that you can only have on a piano. It's not natural to the overtone series. It's not natural to melodic writing. I mean, if you try to sing a whole tone series, you have to actually practice it. You can't just read one.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. It's really hard to do. You have to sit and work on it.
Yeah, you have to skip. Yeah.
It's not natural. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
What Ravel and Debussy both do, I think, is make these natural, but it also avoids having a tonic. It avoids having home.
Yes, that is correct.
Keeps you from having movement. Allows stasis.
Very nice. So, what else? Oh, of course. Well, I mean, we talked about a new chords, right, that are being used as regular parts of the music. Well, we usually call that in music color, I guess, the color of the flavor of the music. And so they're using these chords, these new chords as part of the music, and it's like new colors that are being added to the orchestral writing. And it's the same thing that I guess painters were doing. They're using all these colors that are very vibrant, and they're, you know, I guess repeating a lot of the same points, I guess.
And on a canvas, the color sits there. It doesn't move anywhere. You know, and so they're colors that come from these new tonalities. They sit there, and that's good. it's not going anywhere. It's not supposed to go anywhere.
All right. And I'm going to read this really quick. Well, and we have to explain some of these terms. These composers attempt to explore the fleeting moment and the mystery of life, led them to seek musical equivalents of water, fountains, fog, clouds, and the night. We kind of talked about that already. And to substitute sequence of major seconds and unresolved chords and other sound colors of precise design. We already talked about that. To convey a sense of the intangible flux of time. To convey a sense of the intangible flux of time, they use extended tremolos and other kinds of ostinatos, as well as a variety of rhythmic densities. We kind of already talked about this, but we have to maybe explain that for our non-music listeners. So what's a tremolo? A tremolo is a technique used in the strings, which is basically staying on a note and just using your bow really rapidly.
Back and forth.
Yeah, back and forth. And yeah, it gives it a really cool sound. And of course, we also have to talk about ostinato. We already talked about this ostinato, which we didn't talk about it. So the repetition of maybe a section multiple times.
Sure.
And ostinato comes from the word, well, in Spanish we have ostinato, ostinado, which is like, it's like almost, it's not boring, but it's almost like, it's like pedantic. It's the word pedantic, basically.
Obstinate is our English cognate for that word.
Yeah.
It goes on and on.
Goes on and on. So we have those two words.
Just a constantly repeated figure is an ostinato.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, the beginning of Daphnis and Chloe, as we're about to see, is the same figure. It's repeated for a huge amount of time in the woodwinds while the strings are playing this beautiful melody over.
We experience ostinato patterns at baseball stadiums when they have a baseball organ. They might transpose it, but I mean it's the same idea. It's just a repeated musical figure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have that, but like the painters who stress not new realities but new perceptions of it, Debussy explained that his music's unexpected charm came not so much from the chords or timbres themselves, but from the rigorous choice of what precedes and what follows. For Debussy, form was the result of a succession of colors and rhythms. Dukas put this as a series of sensations rather than the deductions of a musical thought. This concept, in turn, demanded new approaches to performance. So, I mean, we already talked about that a little bit as well. I mean, it's sensations and not so much form, but it's more like, it's like I guess sensations is the
yeah. It's a feeling rather than a progression of thoughts. It's not about being able to say something in a sentence. It's about being able to feel something that could last as long as any feeling might last. I mean, it's a neat musical concept. And
definitely, as a personal experience, every time I hear Daphnis and Chloe, man, wow, it's just so amazing. I mean, definitely I get goosebumps every single time. I love that piece.
I think that's what he's going for.
Of course.
That's a good thing.
He definitely achieves it. Okay, so let's talk about Ravel. And you are our musicologist here, so I'm going to let you talk about him a little bit.
I can give it a college try. The guy was born in 1875, the year after all kinds of composers were born. Schoenberg, Ives, Holst, all born in 1874. 1 year later, he's born in 1875. Dies in 1937, not terribly old, in his 60s. He was a French composer, he was a pianist, and he was a conductor. And especially he was a talented orchestrator. That's where a lot of his fame came from. Mm-hmm. His best known orchestration is of a different composer's work, a Russian by the name of Modest Mussorgsky. Or in English we say Modest Mussorgsky. But his pictures at an exhibition is probably Ravel's best-known orchestration. In fact, when I teach in my music appreciation class here at LSU, the pictures at an exhibition, I don't show them Mussorgsky's piano version. His piece, I show them Ravel's orchestration of it, because that's so much more colorful, so much more beautiful. Just many more things happening. Ravel was a very talented, very precocious young composer. He studied at the Paris Conservatory, or the Paris Conservatoire. I like English better myself. The Paris Conservatoire. He used all kinds of musical techniques when he got out of the conservatory and was composing on his own. He used Baroque ideas, neoclassical ideas, and later in his life he used jazz ideas. Just really interested in innovation. As I mentioned earlier, Bolero, B-O-L-E-R-O, Bolero, is his best known piece. It's essentially Western music history's longest crescendo, as far as I'm aware. It's a very, very long piece, I don't know, about 11 minutes or so.
Yeah.
That just starts quiet with a single snare part that does not stop. Just goes on, the worst snare gig you could ask for. Just goes on and on.
Well,
about as bad as a short ride in a fast machine on the woodblock, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, we see this also. I mean, especially with Ravel, he's really. We talk about maybe exoticism or this kind of thought of looking at maybe other places. Bolero is an Spanish dance, I guess. And so, and his parents were from, his mom, I think, was from Spain. And so he's using this, I guess, from his background, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's just stuff that he had been exposed to. I mean, he was born in the very much near Spain, on the French border with Spain. Born in the Basque town of Ciboure, which is just right across the border from Spain. But yeah, his really neat place. I mean, a really neat composer. He wrote not as much music as his contemporaries wrote, but he wrote really well-known works, lots of piano pieces mainly. But he also wrote several song cycles. He wrote 2 operas, wrote some chamber music, 2 piano concertos. He wrote ballet music,
Yes.
which is what we're talking about today.
Indeed.
Most of his music was available originally on piano, and later he orchestrated them. So almost several of his pieces are available in 2 forms, simply because he was a person who played at the piano and then orchestrated it later. And both works are always quite standable on their own.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty much all there is to. I mean, not all there is to say about Ravel's life, but probably all that's worth throwing out right now.
Yeah. So we're going to talk, of course, about Daphnis and Chloe, the suite number 2. But first, we're going to talk about the ballet that's inspired by. So the ballet was first performed in 1912, and Ravel describes this as this ballet as a choreographed symphony. And I mean, it's not because it's just a ballet with simple music. It's just music just for them to dance, but it's like a very well thought out piece of music that, I mean, can stand on its own. No, it's just not for it to be danced, but it's a really good standalone piece. And I mean, for that reason precisely, he wrote 2 versions, 2 additional versions, which are the suite number 1 and suite number 2, and the suite number 2 is the most performed out of these 3. So I mean, the ballet is performed here and there, the first suite is performed here and there, but the second suite is like, it's performed a lot. And so that tells you there already that this is a really well thought out composition. It's a really good composition. So it was choreographed by Mikhail Folkine, and for the Ballet Russe, or whatever, how do you say it?
Ballet Russe.
Ballet Russe, that's what it is, of Sergei Diaghilev. And he's a very important also figure in the French music scene of that time. Of course, he helped Stravinsky with the Firebird and the Rite of Spring.
Oh, very famously for the Rite of Spring. Mm-hmm. That's Diaghilev, for those of you who don't know, is a lookalike of John Lovitz. You can't miss the guy. If you just Google his name, you'll see all kinds of great pictures of John Lovitz in a top hat. It's really, you can't miss it. But yeah, his Ballet Russe was well known and very prominent ballet company there in Paris.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking about before that we don't know a lot of music that Ravel wrote for choir, right? I mean, as far as we know, there's not a lot.
A few things for choir.
Yeah, but not a lot.
Much. Mainly, there's maybe a couple of pieces for male voices, and there is, I know, one set of 3 choral pieces. But
3, yeah.
That's about it, and 1 opus, 1 little set.
Yeah. So in this composition, he uses a choir, but it's a wordless choir. He's just using basically as they go
vocally
through the the beginning of the piece. So what's the story of the ballet? So it's based on a Greek romance between two shepherds, and it was written in the 2nd century AD by Longus. And the simplified version of the ballet is Act One is in a grotto, and in here girls dance around Daphnis, who is the male character, and Chloe is the female character. And so these girls are dancing around Daphnis, and the girl and so Chloe is jealous of these girls, obviously. So there's a dance contest is proposed, and the winner will be kissed by Chloe. So of course Daphnis dance, and they kiss and all this, and then pirates attack and they kidnap Chloe. So Daphnis looks for her, but he collapses out of despair, and you can imagine all this as a dance. Sure. As a ballet would have been really cool. And so Daphnis has collapsed, and the nymphs come to life, and they revive Daphnis, and they all pray to Pan, who is the god of the shepherds. And so we have to talk a little bit about Pan too, because this will be important later in the ballet. So Pan is the god of the shepherds, as I just said, and he's the one that's half goat and half human. So the story of Pan is that he has a really tragic story. He falls in love with a nymph called Syrinx, and she didn't like him because he was too ugly. And so he chases her, and he chases her through the woods or whatever, and they end up in like a river where there are some reeds. And so the nymph asks her sisters to transform her into one of the reeds. So she gets transformed into the reeds. So Pan gets there, and he grabs these reeds, and he makes a pan flute. And so that's the origin story of the pan flute. And so he's forever playing this instrument. And so that will be important in the third act. So the second act takes place in the pirates' camp, and the parents celebrate, their loot and all this, and they dance, and they are exhausted. And so the chief orders Chloe to dance, and she tries to escape, but the chief carries her off. At this moment, the pan god appears, and all the pirates get scared and they flee. And so the third act, which is the last one, is day breaks, and Daphnis and Chloe are reunited. And so an old shepherd explains that Pan intervened in memory of his own love of Syrinx, the nymph. So the couple, Daphnis and Chloe, they reenact the story of Pan and Syrinx. And they're just Daphnis pledges his love for Chloe, and then they embrace, and all the other shepherds join in a joyous dance, which is the last part of the ballet. So the suite number 2 is basically this third act, which is daybreak, the pantomime, and the general dance. Is there anything you want to say for that?
Not at all. That's good.
I have to plug in my computer because it's going to die.
Death comes to all.
Fun. I could do it. I don't know how you do it.
What?
Can't do it.
This is how we prevent death.
What?
Lather up. Fun. I could do it, man. What happened? I can't do it anymore.
You can do it.
You can do it. All right. The structure of Daphnis and Chloe, Ravel wrote, my work is constructed symphonically according to a very strict tonal scheme by means of a few motifs. Their development assures the work's symphonic homogeneity.
That's a wonderful word, homogeneity.
Homogeneity, that's the one.
Isn't that horrible?
So, in this work, we already talked about this a little bit, that there's a lot of parallel movement. The beginning, especially of the suite, he's using a pentatonic scale, which is E, C, D, A, E, D, C, A, and F sharp. And what he's doing is that he's moving in thirds at the beginning. So the scale will be ba-da-da-da-dum, and what he's doing is that he's going in, what we would call in thirds, but it's not actually thirds, but he's skipping one before going to the next. So he's doing ti da 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 da
Sure.
da, and then he just goes up the scale. Ti da 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 da. And that's in parallel motion with the second flute, who is also doing the same technique. Um, and the second flute is simply a major third from the first flute. So it's parallel motion using a pentatonic scale, skipping one, and then going up the scale. It's really amazing. I mean, it sounds so cool. Um, Okay, I love this. This is a quote from Ravel that he said, my intention was to compose a vast musical fresco in which I was less concerned with archaicism than with faithfully reproducing the grease of my dreams, which is very similar to that imagined and painted by the French artists of the end of the 18th century. So, like we said before, Debussy really didn't embrace the word impressionism, but clearly Ravel is embracing it here. He's saying that, he's imagining it. Well, his imagination of this Greece of his dreams is the same as the one painted by a French artist of the end of the 18th century, and he's, like he said, he's not faithfully reproducing Greece, but he's just reproducing Greece of his dreams. And so that's why, I mean, he's moving ambiguously between keys, and there's a lot of modal scales, like we said, and a lot of dynamics and major and minor relations as well. And I wanted to talk about the second, which the pantomime. So the pantomime it features a flute solo, a very long flute solo, and I mean, obviously, what he's trying to do is he's trying to reenact the story of Pan, who played the flute, and so it's a long flute solo over some pizzicazos in the basses and in the strings. So I wrote a paper about this piece about a year ago, and I'm just gonna read some things about what I found out. The closest example of actual tonality can be found at the beginning of the flute solo, which is the pantomime, by the cellos. So the cellos are tonicizing F sharp minor, and at the same time the flute's playing this melody that is tonicizing different modes in the solo. The flute begins in a major A scale, which coincides with the actual key signature, but it keeps returning to G sharp, to the note G sharp. Like it keeps returning to G sharp. And so this gives, to me, the impression that it's in Locrian mode a little bit.
It's not a word you hear often.
Locrian.
Locrian mode is when you go from B to B on a piano. So it has this. It's the most unstable mode imaginable. It doesn't sound right at all. Like you start and end on what feels like it should end one step later. It's horrible.
So this beautiful flute solo, which obviously represents love, is still a strange passage tonally. So the basses are in F sharp minor, while the flute's in A, but tonicizing G sharp. But maybe also the basses could be in A, tonicizing F sharp in the Aeolian mode. This is crazy. I mean, it's like there's so much happening. I mean, it's hard to analyze this kind of music, but I mean, it was more of a thought experiment for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty in-depth theoretical analysis. But suffice it to say that with all of these things happening all at once, it still sounds, even though there are plenty of things happening, still sounds relatively effortless, right? It still feels very natural and static. And just following along the ideals of Impressionism that these composers were using.
So, I mean, it's hard to find a tonality here, like we said. So I also like this ambiguity, because it's also trying, I guess it's what Ravel's trying to emulate the Greece of his dreams, but in a contemporary way. He's not trying to depict something that, representatively faithfully, which he probably couldn't have even done. So he's just trying to depict it in a modern way. So a lot of this research that I did for this podcast, I found a lot in classicalnotes.net. There is a very well written article about this piece, and also, of course, the Oxford Music Online. There is some good research there.
As always.
Yes. So one of the things that I'm going to read from there is, as day breaks, nature slowly stirs to life, reveal its flow in harpagios, bird chirp in the flutes, and shepherds begin to steer. A gorgeous string theme evokes the sheer beauty of pristine nature, and the sun rises to its full brilliance as a simple, repeated sequence builds into an astounding, powerful climax. It really is amazing. This is the first, the daybreak section, which is using these arpeggios on the woodwinds while the strings are rising like the sun. Is really incredible. And John Coleshaw writes, Ravel as a man searching for a means to express the essence of beauty and finding it. And we already talked about the pantomime, how it represents love, and it has the flute solo. But we haven't talked about the general dance, which is also a very energetic and amazing section. But it's weird because it's in 5/8 for the most part. And I mean, and
so 5/8 time is it's irregular. So it sounds like 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4. It's like walking with a limp.
Yeah. So it must have been hard to dance to this. It's not that fast, but it's still. I mean, it's 5/8, so it would have been hard to dance. Bum 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 bum. It's crazy.
4 5 1 2 3.
So something that I read also was that the dancers reportedly they tried to keep count by chanting the name of the impresario Sergei Diaghilev. Sergei Diaghilev, Sergei Diaghilev, Sergei Diaghilev. Yeah. Yeah. You want to say something about Ravel?
Sure. Ravel obtains a wide range of textures and spatial effects by constantly dividing the strings into 8 parts, frequently using mutes and string playing on fingerboards and placing instruments behind the stage. So he's doing all these strange effects to create all these new textures and spatial effects that would not be done otherwise. The chorus too is directed to sing variously behind, near or on the stage, and with open or closed mouths. So he's just playing with timbre more than anything else. Kramer cites as an innovation in the prominence of the entirely wordless vocals. I mean, what I'm saying is that there is that having these wordless vocals far removed from the European choral tradition, but evoking both ancient roots of singing and the sensory essence of modern life. This synthesis of elements put together creates this entirely new product. I mean, we've had choral pieces without words before, certainly, but when you just throw these words, you contract all of these singers to come and stand in random places on the stage. Stand in random places to perform these, to make this music and different effects. It's a new and interesting synthesis of sounds. Yet true to form, even in the most heavily scored passages, the sonority remains transparent. It's always this open, clear sound. Of course, these are all metaphors. I mean, sound is naturally clear. I've never been able to see one. But no. Lawrence Davies credits Ravel's bright colors and sharply picked out instrumentation as enormously influential, enabling French music to emerge from beneath the protective shell of Wagnerism, quote unquote, and its thick, rich sonorities. So what they are, it is a reaction from German Romanticism of the big orchestral sounds that one hears in a Wagner opera. And as we said in the last podcast, Wagner's operas are about the orchestra. It's all about these huge sounds. Ravel was also intrigued by the industrial sounds of factories and the regular pounding rhythms. These rhythms found their way into the closing moments of Daphnis. Near the end of the work, they have these pounding rhythms coming out of the fold. Edward Downes adds that with all of its brilliant orchestration, intoxicating color, and sensuous harmonies, Daphnis remains, quote, an essentially patrician score, unquote, and that Ravel, a spiritual aristocrat, never once relaxed his mastery of form and precise craftsmanship. What we're saying is this guy's a genius. This guy's really putting his, a very good craftsman. He's really putting things together quite efficiently.
I used to have a professor, I won't name names, but and he would say that usually a lot of impressionistic music, and Ravel in particular, he's trying to emulate climax. And of course, I mean, sexual climax, I guess,
Sure.
in this impressionistic music. I guess the last thing I'm going to say is we already talked about the final, which is in 6/4 time. That's not regular, and then that it gets pushed into a 3/4 and then into a 2/4. So he's trying to, I guess, compress a little bit into more regular time, and I mean it gives a lot of forward momentum into the ending. And of course, this was, like we said before, this was challenging for the dancers at the time, but it's challenging for nothing compared to what would come the next year, which would be Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Right. Well, to be fair, I feel like this ballet probably had a much more pleasant premiere than...
Of course, of course. I mean, but I've read about the Rite of Spring, how, of course, a lot of people booed and people left, but by the end of it, people were, okay, we're going to stick through it, and I think by the end, people actually clapped.
Well, at some point, regardless of what's happening on the stage, you just have to congratulate the guys for keeping going through all the booze and the vegetables, and the fists thrown, and it's just horrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else you want to say about Ravel or Daphnis? Or
One thing there is to say about Impressionism, something that I learned in my piano lessons back in undergrad, was a lot of people, when they hear impressionistic music, think that it's very unmeasured. They think it's just this wash of sound that stands outside of time. It's actually very carefully metered out.
Yes.
You have to count, just voraciously count to make it work. Even if it's just you on a piano and you're not having to coordinate with anybody, you still have to keep the regular beat in your head. Is extremely, the tempo does not change unless it says for the tempo to change. It is very strict time music, but as a result of this precision, it feels like it's not. Just an impression,
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, that might be the reason why Debussy never quite liked people calling his music impressionistic, because I think that's just a limiting term. Okay, your music is about colors, or that's it. It's just about points and colors. But there is so much more than that these composers put into the music. I mean, it's really complex music in the end. It's not just it's just points and colors. That's all it is. It's not. There's a lot to it. That's much more than that. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. So we reached the end of our second episode. You can, like we said last week, if you think we can add anything else or any addendums to this episode, just let us know. We have a new email address, which is symphonicpodcast@gmail.com. And you can, of course, leave comments. And soon we're going to put our episodes on iTunes. I'm working on it. It's not easy, but I'm trying to. And
to get through the vetting process, it's hard. Background check, it's horrible.
Yes. Anything else?
That's all I have.
All right, good. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, guys.